Hello, everyone. I am very excited to have today here someone I really admired a lot, and it's an honor to have this conversation with him for the first time. Pulitzer Prize winning critic, writer, biographer, really an artist, a great artist, and I am honored and privileged by this opportunity. And Tim, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me today. Um,
Oh, I've been looking so forward to this.
Thank you, thank you. Before we started recording, I was telling you that we can talk for as little or as much as you want. And I mentioned to you that I was uh, um, programmed to talk to Jan Swafford for 45 minutes, and then I ended up talking to him for 4 hours almost. So
Well,
we're
I
hoping
wi
that
I
to keep
wish
it
I could
shorter.
do I wish I could do that today, but it's a slightly crazy day. But we'll have a good talk, and if we don't finish everything, we'll do it again.
Yes, that's my hope. You were mentioning that that's how your friendship with Glenn Gould started. You
I was supposed to talk with him for half an hour, and it went on for about 2.5 hours the first time. And then after that, we talked every week, and we got to know each other very well. And he was a really wonderful man, and um, that was on a little cassette player, no pictures involved, and it worked. And it's been put up on YouTube. There's a YouTube version of our very first talk where I tell him about call waiting. That thing where the call
I
comes
thought that
in.
was hilarious. I thought that was hilarious.
There's one other thing. I may for a second have to put you on hold, but that's just only for a second at one point.
Sure.
Because somebody may be calling in on this number. I should have had you call another one, but I'll just get them off immediately.
I can. Well, wait a minute. How can they call this number?
Well, it's a special thing they have called the call waiting system. They don't have that in Toronto yet?
Not that I know of.
It's a very special sort of thing. It allows an incoming call to come into the house, and you'll hear a little beep, and you can press down the receiver and take that call and say, I'll call you back later tomorrow, which is exactly what I will do. But I do have to take that at one point.
Well, look, do you want me? Would it be simpler if I simply call you back on another?
No, I think this would be best because I'm all set up on this phone now.
Okay.
So there really probably shouldn't be any interruption.
You know,
Well,
but I heard
yeah.
that interview, and it was fantastic. I have to say that one of my favorite things. I like running in the afternoons, and one of my favorite things was to listen to the interviews
Oh my gosh.
that you did with Glenn after the second version of the Goldberg variations came out. I loved that conversation. I was listening to it a little bit again the other day on my run, and you were sort of pointing out that to Gould that his second version was not really that much longer than the first. It's just that he had really made some repeats and made it longer that way.
You know what really puzzled me, Glenn, and in fact got me onto this whole timing kick, was that in the new version, you observe, well, by no means all, but certainly a good number, I guess about a dozen of the first repeats.
Oh yeah, that's right. I did them in all the canons, so that would be that'd be 9, and then in the Fugetta, which is variation 10, and the Quodlibet, which is variation 30, and a couple of the other Fugetta-like variations. I guess about, I think 13 in all have first repeats.
Yeah, but you see my point. When you subtract the amount of time devoted to those repeats from the total of 51 minutes or whatever, the overall timing is really not that different from the original version, which didn't have any repeats at all.
Son of a gun.
So you did, in fact, observe tempi that were not that much slower in many cases in the new version, and in one or two very notable variations, you actually played more quickly. And yet the feeling, the mood, the architecture of this performance is just so totally different that, frankly, I can't figure it out.
Well, as a matter of fact, you practically have figured it out, Tim. And I want to say right now, I was kidding when I asked if you were a stopwatch fetishist, because the way that this performance was constructed, was worked out, has in fact actually a great deal to do with something very like a stopwatch. Let me back up a little bit. I've come to feel over the years that a musical work, however long it may be, ought to have basically, I was going to say one tempo, but that's the wrong word. One pulse rate, one constant rhythmic reference point. Now, obviously, there couldn't be anything more deadly dull than to exploit one beat that goes on and on and on indefinitely. I mean, that's what drives me up the wall about rock, you know, and about, I say this in the presence of its most committed advocate and ardent propagandist, about minimalism.
Oh, I think we should argue that one another time.
Yeah,
don't
probably
you?
so. Anyway, I would never argue in favor of an inflexible musical pulse. You know, that just destroys any music. But you can take a basic pulse and divide it or multiply it, not necessarily on a scale of 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, but often with far less obvious divisions, I think, and make the result of those divisions or multiplications act as a subsidiary pulse for a particular movement or section of a movement or whatever. And I think this doesn't in any way preclude rubato. If you have an accelerando, for example, you simply use the accelerando as a transition between two aspects of the same basic pulse. You know, so in the case of the Goldberg, there is in fact one pulse, which with a few very minor modifications, mostly modifications which I think take their cue from retards at the end of the preceding variation, something like that. One pulse that runs all the way throughout.
I'll just tell you real quickly. That's a very different interview because the one of us talking about call waiting and all the other things we
Yeah,
talked
that's
about.
another interview. That's another.
No, but that was spontaneous. The one with Glenn and I talking about the Goldbergs was he sent me a cassette of the recording. I listened to it. I made notes on it, and then I called him back and we had a talk, and I told him some of my thoughts on it. He actually threw in at least one or two of his own thoughts to sort of put in my mouth. I was an actor doing his script for that. And there's nothing that I say that I don't mean. But in that case, we're both acting. He's playing Glenn Gould and I'm playing Tim Page. And on the first one, which predates that one by almost 2 years, that's just Tim and Glenn talking, which I prefer because I think it's more like what Glenn was really like. He had a rather what's the right word? Rather he liked to present himself and not have any ums and ahs and all that sort of thing. And when we talked on the phone, we went to subject, and so I never expected that to ever be heard by anybody, but of course it has been heard, and I'm glad it's there because it's just having fun.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I was going to avoid talking to you today about Glenn Gould because I know every time you talk to somebody, you have to talk a lot about Glenn, and that's great. But I just didn't want to.
We can move on. We can move on. But
No, I wanted to talk about him too.
Okay.
But I have here this wonderful biography that you wrote of Don Powell, and which I really, really loved. And thanks to you, I bought these other 2 books of Don Powell, you know, the A Time to Be Born and Turn Magic Wheel.
Oh, yeah. Well, those are great books. Those are 2 very great books. 2 of her very best.
So I was thinking about you recommended this A Time to Be Born to me, and then I got this one just to follow up on my Powell reading, and because also in your biography you talk about the fact that the publishers were not very excited about this work when she sent it to them, and they thought it was not a good writing or a good novel. And later on,
that's in her diary. She was very unhappy about that. You chose the 2 books. A Time to Be Born was her biggest seller.
Yes.
And it almost made the bestseller list. The Turn Magic Wheel was her favorite among her New York books. And it's also my favorite. It's the book which made me a huge Dawn Powell fan.
Right, 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 right. I was going to ask you about that. How did you? I mean, you're responsible. If correct me if I'm wrong, but you're responsible from bringing her sort of up from obscurity. I mean, um, she was kind of forgotten somehow. I never heard about her before you introduced me to her. And I have to say, in parentheses, this is one of the things that I love about the way you write, the way you really conduct yourself to the world is you make people fall in love with the things that you love. And I think that is an
Thank you.
incredible thing, because I think as a musician, I always struggle with this, with this idea of like, or question of why am I doing what I'm doing? And I think ultimately, the thing that we do should be perhaps to make other people love the things that we love. And I can't think of anybody better than you
Oh, gosh, thank
to
you.
embodies that kind of uh, um, you know state of mind, which is make people fall in love with the things that you love. And you made me fall in love with Dan Powell, and I am
Oh, I'm so
incredibly
glad.
grateful for that. But that is an incredible gift, Tim. I mean, how did you fall in love with her? Were you aware of her from the very beginning? What's the story behind your focus on
Well,
her?
well, I knew a very little bit about her, but I had a friend who was ill in San Francisco. He was dying, and I flew out to San Francisco a lot in 1991. And in those days, you didn't have computers that you bring on. And, they'd have maybe only one movie. And those were long trips. So I would always take 2 or 3 books to read on all these trips. And I wouldn't finish them. But the way I discovered Dawn was Edmund Wilson, who was a friend of hers and one of our greatest critics, wrote a review of her last book, and it sounded so fascinating that because he talked about her, he talked about how she was Greenwich Village, he talked about how she did all these other things. And I thought, wow, well, I used to live in the Village and I live in New York. And I was just thinking that I've got to find her books. And so in California, I had a lot of secondhand bookstores. Remember, we didn't have BookFind or eBay or anything.
Or
I had to
Amazon
go
or
to
anything like
different stores to find them. And I got interested in her, and I met with her executor. And then I got a letter from the family saying how thrilled they were that I was writing about her.
wow.
And I became friends with the family, and it turned out that the executor had not done the very best job in the world on it. And a lot of things had gone out of copyright, other things. She hadn't answered people who wanted to make films of Dawn's books. And so, and the family was furious with her. And I joined forces with the family, and we change things around, which is very odd for a reporter. We try not to get involved in our own stories, but this turned into a project that really kept me going for maybe about 12 years.
Wow.
My
To write the biography, or basically to get to acquainted with all of her
Well
works?
it was a bit of both, because my lawyer said, you've done a very bad job with this, and he contacted her lawyer, and it was agreed that we would take over the rights. And the woman is now dead, long dead. Pretty much everybody I talked to for the Dawn Powell biography is now dead. But there was still time to interview a lot of people, including 2 of her nieces who knew her very well, and her wonderful cousin, Jack Sherman. And it was Jack Sherman's
Yes.
closeness to her and the book is dedicated in part to Jack. You know, he was a wonderful person, and we started bringing out her books, and we kept doing it. We did her diaries, and then we did her letters, and we did
I have to
the
read those. I have to
yeah.
read
The
those.
letters are fun. The letters
Yeah,
are a lot of
because
fun.
you quote a lot of the diaries
Yeah.
on these biographies.
Yeah, and a lot of the letters too. But anyway, she was a remarkable author, and I'm so thrilled that she is now, you know, somewhat back in the public. And something like 13 or 14 of her books are now in print.
Wow,
We've
that's
held off
thanks to
on.
you. I mean, that's
Well,
incredible.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I
It's
guess
incredible.
there had been earlier articles about her by a guy named Matthew Josephson, who knew her very well and wrote something, and then Gore Vidal, who didn't know her that well but knew her and loved her work, wrote
Yeah, you
something,
talk about that on
New
your
York Review of Books. And that was huge because that meant all of a sudden a lot of people read the New York Review of Books. And it was, you know, it was just a great thing that that happened. And by that point was when I discovered her about 2 or 3 years after his article came out. And I didn't see his article until later. I just had this collection of Edmund Wilson, then I got a lot of her books. And I never met Gore Vidal. We used to hang out in the same Hollywood restaurant, but it just never happened. And
and the Edmund Wilson. I mean, Edmund Wilson was long
Edmund
dead after
Wilson,
you read this article, right?
yeah, he wrote the article in 63, I think,
How did you
62
come?
or
How did you
63.
come to read this article? Where was it
Well,
published?
it was reprinted in a book of Edmund Wilson's reviews.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so
I love his
I read
writings.
it. Huh?
I love his writings.
Oh, he's a wonderful
The
writer.
Finland Station is one of my favorite books.
Yeah,
I
it's a great book.
it's a
It's a
great
great
book. So,
book.
but I used to
And
read some of those reviews. I have to
they're wonderful. And you know, there's a whole collection of them in the Library of America now. And I strongly recommend those books because he wrote a lot about fiction and other kinds of books for the New Yorker for many years. And he you know, he loved her. He died in 1972. So I turned 18 that year. So I didn't know him. I did know his sister, who helped me with the challenge to the Executor. And that was a good thing because she was a friend of Dawn's, and so she helped me a great deal. But no, I never met Edmund. But I found a publisher who wanted to do these books, and then another publisher, and we
yes.
finally
And
brought out 9 of her novels in Library of America. And then there were a couple more that Steerforth brought out, which are good, but not quite as good as the ones that all got into Library of America. And then there are a couple which have not been reissued, one of which has not been reissued because she was upset with the editing. And I always hoped we'd find another part of it, which she cut at one point, but so far it has not turned up.
is it in need of editing, or just there's a part of the book that is missing?
No, the book is fine. And a lot of people really liked the book. And it was the one which some people wanted to make a film of. But we have it from Dawn's diaries and from her letters that she was not happy with the way it was cut. It's a very short book, and they cut out a lot of it. And I was hoping eventually we'd find the papers. At this point, I don't think we're going to find the papers. And so if anyone out there wants to publish A Cage for Lovers, tell them to call me because I can make it happen.
Well, you never know. Now with Netflix putting out a lot of these,
Oh, I'd
uh,
love to see a movie made. Yeah.
You
I
know,
love, and there's some of her books which make really good movies.
yeah, I
So
was wondering about that.
spread the word.
Right. You're right about that in your biography about her relationship with the film industry, but that really never went anywhere. Somehow.
Well, very early on in her life, when she was in her mid-30s, two of her books were turned into films.
Mhm.
But both of the films survive, but they don't. One of them was directed by Erich von Stroheim, who's probably best remembered now as the assistant to Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard.
Right. Right.
But he was a great filmmaker himself, but I can't think of two geniuses who needed each other less than Dawn Powell and Erich von Stroheim. He took a play about Midwestern girls in New York, and he turned it into a film called Hello, Sister, which turned out to be his last film. And he added all sorts of Viennese complexes. He was a Freudian, and he was European, Central European, and it
I have to
didn't
see
work.
that film. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, you can probably find a copy somewhere. We've never reissued these two things, but they're now in public domain. So if you look for either Hello, Sister or Men of Iron, which is based on her novel, The Story of a Country Boy. And that doesn't work either, but that just doesn't work because it was done quickly. It was done for the double feature market. It's only about 70 minutes long. And it's just not a very good film. But yeah, I'd love to see some movies made of
Well,
her
I
work.
think I think you should write a script to a Netflix production of one of her, of a movie made of one of her books. I mean, have you ever written a
Yeah,
script?
yeah.
Well,
I have, and I'm not
there you
very
go.
good at it. So, I'm
Have you seen
gonna
the scripts people write nowadays?
well, look, they're there, and there's one which we are hoping will be made into a film, but I better not say anything more about it
Right.
right.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I love about Don Powell is that the way she describes New York. And I'm a New Yorker. I mean, I live now in Miami, but I moved to New York when I was in my late teens, and I came from Cuba. And
Uh-huh.
I remember um, when I was in Cuba, I would watch these Woody Allen movies, and there were a few episodes here and there of Seinfeld that I got to see, and I loved that kind of comedy, but I never really realized that I didn't understand that kind of comedy and that kind of New York
Sure.
based sort of art until I moved to New York and lived in New York, and then started rewatching these films, and started watching Seinfeld, and later on Curb Your Enthusiasm and things like that,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
the quintessential New York Jewish humor, and that was really great to discover, and I
No,
and it kind of
those are great.
multiplied my love for New York and for the work of these guys that I uh, watched when I was very young, and living in Cuba, really very different cultural
Yeah, yeah.
places. But with Dawn is the same thing. You read her, and it's about kind of understanding yourself living in New York,
Yeah.
and how has that scene changed? Because a lot of her writing is about loving and hating at the same time, that scene of New York
Yeah.
of posers
And
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 hypocrites.
and the two books that you have are her, in my opinion, her very best New York novels. Yeah, so So I mean, she's wonderful. She wrote a number of short stories, and her very first novel was about New York, but she thought it was a terrible failure, and she would burn every copy that she ever found in a bookstore.
But Tim, do you feel that do you feel the same way I feel about Dan Powell's depiction of New York, and do you feel that New York has changed that much from that era she's describing to the way it is now, or the way it was when you were living in New York for that many years? I feel like reading her that it's still the same thing. I don't know how you feel about that.
Um, well, it's terribly expensive now, which is really a drag, because one of the reasons I moved to New York over 50 years ago now, um, was because, I had an apartment. It was a walk up. It was a 5-floor walk up, which I could still do in those days. And it was, it was $225 a month, and $225 a month doesn't even buy you a hotel room if you're looking for a really good hotel most of the time in New York for one night. So that's changed enormously. And a lot of things just change because of time. And, you know, I mean, a lot of them just change because it's a different time. And it's now a city to a large extent for rich people. I am very, very lucky that I have a rent stabilized apartment, and I'll probably never leave it, because I've been in this building for almost 50 years. So it's one of those things. It changes. A lot of the restaurants I loved are gone. Um, it's safer now than it was when I moved here, when it was not very safe at all. But it was probably about as safe as Dawn Powell's New York was, maybe even safer. But I don't think it's as interesting as it used to be. But it's still it rivals with Los Angeles as the creative capital of the United States. And so there are a lot of reasons why I stay here, but I could never afford to live here. And, young kids like I was once a long time ago, I moved to New York when I was 20, and I had my own apartments, and they weren't very expensive. And I was able to make a living and stay in them. You know, in my building, 2 flights above me, 3 flights above me, they're 4 or 5 or 6,000 now. And that's just craziness. I could never afford that. Even with roommates, I could never afford that.
Right, right. Yeah, it's changed a lot from the times I was a student living in New York as well. I have to say that unfortunately it's not the same. But I come to New York often, either for concerts or to visit, and I have to say that when I'm there for a week, I get my doses of art right to my veins. I go to the Met, I go to New York Philharmonic,
Right,
I
right,
do
sure.
I go to all the museums, see the new exhibits, and in a week or so, I really try to cover all of the places that I love and miss so
It
much.
it's a great city. I mean, London's more expensive than New York. And maybe Paris and Amsterdam too. It's a very great city, and there are lots of wonderful things. It's just not a city where people, like the Talking Heads or television or all these, you know, bands could come and they could just take over a loft and make themselves into bands, and that's different. And people like, say, somebody like Philip Glass, who came here back in 1967, and he just settled in. He stayed here and, in nice apartments and less nice apartments, driving a cab. You could really do that, back in those days. It was really, really an easy place to live and very, very inexpensive.
Yeah, no, I always had a love-hate relationship with New York. I feel that I am a New Yorker more than I am a Cuban because I lived,
Hmm.
somehow more years in New York than I did in Cuba. And there is something about growing up in New York from your late teens till
Yeah,
your, late 30s that that shapes your life, shapes who you are,
yeah.
and of course you love it and hate it at the same time because, one of my favorite things is to return to New York, but the second most favorite thing is to leave it right after right after I've spent a week in New York.
Well, I'm lucky. I live in a quiet neighborhood. I've lived here a very long time. I know a lot of the people in my building, and I have other friends who've been here for a while. And
So, Steve, the other day I was watching a program, William Buckley firing line, and you were there with Rosalind Turek and was it uh,
Skylar
Sha-
Chapin.
Chapin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And what year was this? Early '90s or something like
Yeah,
that?
no, no, long, long before that. That
Okay,
was in the spring of 1985. So that's
okay, 85.
41 years old. I'm the only person on that show left living. I knew Rosalind. I was very friendly with Skylar, and I had just written Bill a note saying, "Would you like to talk about Glenn Gould?" Because he always used Bach to start his program,
Yes,
and
the
um,
Brandenburg concerto.
yeah, yeah, the Brandenburg number 2, the big trumpet movement. And he just said, "Sure, come on." And remember, this is back before there was as much cable TV as there is now. And I thought it was incredibly nice of Bill.
You were
A
so
lot,
young there, right? I mean,
yeah,
how old were you there?
I would have just turned 30.
Oh, and you were so eloquent. So, I mean, you were my favorite part of the
Oh,
interview.
well, he was very nice to me, and one of the things about Bill, and even people who can't bear his politics, and I
Yes,
certainly
I
agree
agree.
with him on some things, is that he cared about culture, and he cared about music, and he cared about talking to people about this. And so I thought he might go for this idea, and I got a letter back and set it up, and we had a very, very good time. It was really a very pleasant time. And again, with some disagreements, I revere his memory because it was a very nice thing to do to ambitious kid who just had his first hardcover book out and who wanted to talk about Glenn Gould.
It
So
was the Glenn Gould Reader, right?
the Glenn Gould Reader had come out the preceding fall. I think that was recorded in April or May of 1985, and it was broadcast for the first time that summer. It's still never been officially broadcast. Somebody had a tape and put it up on YouTube, and as
Yes, I
far as
saw it
I
on YouTube.
yeah, yeah, and what they did was they didn't use they used some of the Glenn clips that I had, but not all of them. I mean, Firing Line used them, but they cut them out for this. So so it's not a complete episode. I keep trying to get the people who own all the Firing Line things to bring it out
The
as
Hoover
part of the
Institution,
series.
The Hoover.
The Hoover Institute. Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's because it's not political, but they've never actually brought out an official version, and who knows, maybe this talk will lead to that because I'd love to see that out.
Yes, well, I looked
And
for it and I couldn't find it either. And yeah, we could write to them and see if they could put it out in its entirety. I think that
I
would be a
think
great
that would
idea.
be great. And if you want to do it and present the modern day premiere of this show from 41 years ago, it'd make a lot of us
That would
happy,
be great.
because
Yeah, that would be great.
Skylar has wonderful children, and who I'm friends with online. And I'm sure they'd love to see it. They'd never seen it when I put it up on my Facebook page a while back, but it is only a partial version. So I'd like very much to see the whole thing go up sometime.
And Tim Page, although he studied at Mannes and Juilliard, elected not to perform but to criticize. He won in 1983 the Deems Taylor Award for Music Criticism, which he writes as music and cultural affairs editor with the New York Times. He sees both points of view, and last year brought out the Glenn Gould Reader, a compilation of the writings of Glenn Gould. I quote from the final paragraph of his prologue to this book, quote, "My most lasting memory of Gould will always be one from our final meeting on a chilly August evening in Toronto, a little more than a month before he died. At 3 in the morning, we drove to a deserted Midtown recording studio where, clad in his usual indoor summer wear, 2 sweaters, wool shirt, scarf, slouch hat, he relaxed at the keyboard of a Yamaha Baby Grand and played through his own piano arrangements of Richard Strauss's opera. The Yamaha suddenly became a 6-foot square orchestra, dense contrapuntal lines, translucently clear and perfectly contoured, echoed through the empty room, far from the eyes and ears of the curious world, the hungry fans and disapproving critics, the lucrative contracts and percentage deals. Gould played through the night, lost in the sheer joy of creating something beautiful." My first question then directed Miss Page. Was a part of the beauty you documented owing to your hearing what you heard, deprived of those who do not hear a performer live?
Well, it's sort of hard to say. I think we will have a chance, really, or I will have a chance to judge that, because I've brought a surprise for us today. I've brought a tape of Glenn playing from Strauss's opera Elektra, which is the same thing he played for me. And certainly there's some magic to watching a performer there in person. But as for whether one serves music more completely by playing a live concert, which then evaporates into air or into the memories of the people who were there, or actually spending the time making a recording which is there permanently, is something which is open to debate.
After I saw this episode, I looked for more episodes like this related to music, and I saw that he did like 2 or 3 more programs with Rosalind Turek
We
about
loved her. They were
the
great
Goldberg
friends.
variations. There is one that I think he did a program he did at her house, and she played a few of the variations, and I love the way you guys were talking in that interview, and how you're obviously you love Glenn Gould's version of these variations, which I do too. I love both of them immensely.
Yeah. And there are
Perhaps the
actually 2
second
more,
he
There are
did
2
2 more.
more too. He did. One for the CBC a year before he made the famous, the recording that made him famous. And then he played it in Salzburg in 1958 or 59, and that is now available too, and that's terrific.
Yes, I think
And
I've heard that. Yes.
yeah, it's terrific. I mean, it might be my favorite. I mean, I have to say I really love at least 3 of those 4 versions. The early one, he did better when he did it for Columbia. But the Salzburg performance is really excellent, and I heartily recommend it to anybody who's interested.
Yeah, no, that would be that's a great. I've heard it before, and that's also great. But are these considered official sort of recordings, or more
Well,
like pirates? How would
no,
you?
it's official now because his record company brought it out, and it had
Okay.
come out a few times before that. So you can get all 4 of them legitimately now, but a lot of his recordings are in the public domain anyway now. So
Okay.
one recording that has never been issued by Columbia or CBS or Sony or whatever it's been called. I've been around for all 3 of those
Right,
versions.
right.
Is he did a marvelous Brandenburg Concerto number 5 with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. There's another one with the Baltimore, but that's not as good. The one with the Detroit Symphony under Paul Paray and under is just wonderful, and that's something I would hope people would take a look-see for too.
Yes, I'll put the link to all of these recordings on the
I hope so.
description of the, so that people can just
Wonderful.
dive in and go down the recording rabbit hole.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I loved your conversations now that we are talking about Glenn, and I think we should talk about him because your life is so connected to his in so many ways, and it's very interesting that you were describing how when you started as a writer, as a music critic, you just wrote to him that you wanted to do this interview, and you were not writing for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or anything. You were writing for a Soho newspaper, and
Good news.
how come he, was that, what was that letter? Have you ever published that letter so people can see what you wrote to him to
I
convince him?
don't think I have that letter. It's
What made him?
probably
What made him?
it's probably in the Gould archives up in Ottawa.
I'm curious what made him look at that and say like, "Hey, that'll be great to talk to this kid." I don't know anybody today that could
Well,
do
he
something like-"
asked to know what I wanted to talk to him about. And I didn't ask the usual questions like, when will you come back to the stage? I didn't ask him that. I didn't ask why he hummed when he played. I didn't include any of these things. I included things that were more interesting to me and more important, interesting to Glenn. I wanted to talk about Sibelius, who I had just fallen in love with, and I knew Glenn was a huge Sibelius admirer. I wanted to talk about late Richard Strauss, who I'd been in love with for at least 5 or 6 years by that point. And I knew Glenn loved Richard Strauss. And so, it's one of those things which, it's it's just one of those things that he read my letter. He decided he liked me, liked the things I was going to talk about. And, he didn't need any more publicity then.
Right.
He had agreed to give 2 interviews for his 25th anniversary with Columbia, CBS, Sony. And he did. He gave one to me and he gave one to the writer Lawrence Shames at Esquire. And, Esquire had a lot bigger circulation than the Soho News, and Lawrence did a very good job. But, it didn't mean that much to him. He didn't want to give one to somebody else. He'd given one to People magazine maybe a year before that, and he was furious about it. He didn't like the interview at all. He loved my interview. He told me my interview, I don't want to sound like our president here, but he told me that our interview was the best one he'd ever had.
The best interview ever had.
I mean, I don't like, bragging about things, but he loved that interview, and that made us friends, and we talked quite a lot for the next 2 years. And then only a month before he died, or rather a month before his stroke, we did the Goldberg Variations interview. But that was all scripted, as I mentioned.
I think probably I'm going to venture out and say that's probably what he saw is what we all see in you, which is, this capacity that you have of connecting to people, to these artists, and make them fall in love with them. So I think he saw that you are somebody who loved this music so passionately and loved what he did so passionately in a very genuine way somehow. I imagine that probably he felt that with other critics, they were more concerned about, writing for their magazine or covering a story or
Right.
asking the same questions for people that just wanted to read the same things. Whereas you um, were just genuinely asking things that you would ask a friend that you were talking on a Sunday afternoon, a casual conversation,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and
true.
that's more revealing of the humanity of the artist.
Well, I'm very honored by your comments. I'm a little shy about them, but it's very kind of you to say those things. And for me, I was never interested when I interviewed people in just being part of the publicity machine. If I was going to talk to somebody, they had to be somebody I really, really wanted to talk to and find out what it's all about. And and that has led in a couple places to some very good friendships, and I'm happy about it. And I think they recognized that I was serious, that I was not going to ask silly questions. And Glenn and I later on, I sometimes wish I'd recorded these, but of course I'd never do that to somebody, who was, a friend, just record him secretly or something. But we were very silly with each other after a while. He'd call
Right.
up and he'd tell me a joke, or ask me a riddle. I mean, Glenn was a very funny and, in my opinion, a very, very nice man. And I genuinely, I came to really love him. I was heartbroken when he died.
So young, also.
Yeah, I
Yes.
know.
Yes.
I'm 21 years older than he was when he died. And I
Mhm.
was also, um, yeah, and he was about 21 when I was born, or 22. He just turned 22. So it's weird, but time goes on.
Yeah. No, I have to say that um, I love his recordings, and one of the things that you were talking to him on the interview after the second version of the Goldbergs came out, and you managed to get out of him that kind of um, rhythmic relations, tempo relations between the theme and the variations, and why he was playing them much slower than what he did before. And I have to say that I love his commitment to rhythm and the rigor that he brings to to the rhythm. It's not as much the tempo, because this is one of the things that I always talk to students in a master class, because I always say you can play faster or slower, but the rhythmic rigor needs to be there somehow. And I find that in later recordings of the Goldberg, a little bit of that or a lot of that is lost to me, at least as a pianist and um, as a you know lover of Bach music in particular,
Sure.
that
Sure.
kind of architecture is lost for the sake of a romantic melody, or a
Yeah, yeah. Glenn would certainly agree with you, you
Mhm,
know, and I agree to some degree. As I say, the thing about the very first recording, I'm talking about the first official recording, the Columbia recording, was that nobody had ever heard, first off, way back then, and that's 70 years ago, more than 70 years ago now. People didn't play the Goldbergs very much. They were considered kind of like the way the art of fugue is considered now. They were considered very brilliant, unbelievably interesting, but to a large extent for musicians only. A few people had recorded them. Turek had recorded them. She recorded them at least twice. Edwin Fisher had recorded them,
Yes.
and Wanda Landowska had done them on the harpsichord. But there weren't, it's not like today when the Goldberg Variations, at least in New York or Miami or Los Angeles, it's something that will sell out a house now. It's a genuinely popular piece, and it was not in 1955. And Glenn had to muscle Columbia a bit to make that as his first record. But of course, it continued to sell, it sold immediately all over the place. And it made him famous, and it also really made the piece famous to a much larger audience than it was before. There must be at least 100 recordings of the Goldberg Variation by now, but of course there are hundreds of recordings of, lots of things. But back then it was considered an obscure work
Right. Right.
by the
It's funny
general.
because, right, with a few exceptions, I find that the recordings prior to Glenn's recording have more in common with Glenn than the recordings after Glenn's recording. So, I mean, that's probably out for debate, but I see him, he's kind of a revolutionary take on Bach, sort of
Yeah,
as a as rescuing of the past,
yeah, yeah.
and rescuing that passion and that love of music and that wittiness of Bach, but in a very I see him as a traditionalist. Funny enough, rather than an eccentric, you know. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah. In some ways, I realize I think James Friskin also recorded the Goldbergs before. He was the head of the piano at Juilliard for years and years in the 40s and 50s. I think he also recorded them, but I don't think they've been brought out on CD. And I'd like to hear those again because he was a very interesting pianist and married to a woman who unfortunately gave up composing. Her name was Rebecca Clark. And when she was young, she wrote some very beautiful pieces as Clark with a final E. And they lived in my neighborhood. And Rebecca Clark was still living when I came to town. Friskin had died in 67. As for, my own take, what I always tell people when they tell me that they absolutely love Glenn Gould is that if you try to imitate Glenn Gould, you've misunderstood him. Because Glenn's whole business was about doing his own version of things. And in my opinion, the best way to take the inspiration that we get from his various Goldberg variations is to find our own way into it. And I think that's better. I have heard some pianists who've done it in a very Gouldian way, and some have done it pretty well in a Gouldian way, but I don't think that's really what Glenn was about.
I find that pianists nowadays have become the victims of the archetypes from the past. Like I feel like these pianists from the past have been elevated to kind of iconic levels, which now have become sort of archetypes in the music business. So if you want to play the Goldbergs, you have to sort of embody that Glenn Gould archetype, because that's what people are expecting if you want to sell the product somehow, you
Well,
know.
then maybe,
Or perhaps it's
maybe.
more unconscious, subconscious.
Well, I think you could say that everybody should at least come to terms with the Glenn Gould recording, whether they like it or not. And there are people who really, really, really don't like his recordings.
Yeah,
And that's legitimate. I mean, I disagree, but that's absolutely legitimate. But the chief critic of the New York Times for many years was a man named Harold C. Schoenberg.
yes.
And I knew Harold. I loved Harold. And Harold did not like Glenn Gould very much. And an older generation, it was more, I mean, I've always thought that if you were going to compare Glenn to somebody, you might go to a different field, like, say, Bobby Fischer in chess, although he was much nicer man than Fischer. or maybe James Dean. He was this very, very handsome guy who did some wonderful things and then more or less gave up his work that way. Harold loved people like Joseph Hoffman, Vladimir de Pachman, Horowitz, and other people like that. I think Glenn was hugely influenced by Hoffman, whom he heard in Canada as a boy when he was about 13 or 14. And he was just staggered by how good Hoffman was, even then. And Hoffman had a drinking problem and a number of other things. And it's generally agreed that his later work was not as good as the things he did in, say, his 20s, 30s, 40s. But Glenn really admired him, but he was not a huge Horowitz admirer. He admired Rubinstein a great deal, but didn't want to play the Rubinstein material at all. I mean, Glenn's worst recording, in my opinion, is his recording of the Chopin B flat, the B minor sonata, not the B flat. And he hated the piece. He plays it like he hates it. He never allowed it to be issued in his lifetime, but when he died and he became this incredible cult figure, they issued it. And I rather wish they hadn't, because Glenn admitted that he occasionally played pieces he didn't like. There are a lot of Mozart sonata recordings that aren't very good, although he could be a fabulous Mozart player if you listen to him on his early Mozart recordings, or you listen to his recording of Kerschel 491. That's just a wonderful recording. And there's a live recording of that too. On YouTube. YouTube is where we get all these things these days.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. And, so yeah, I'm a little off the subject now, perhaps, but
No. I think it makes sense. But the reason I was mentioning this is because I think somehow pianists probably unconsciously or subconsciously are kind of trapped in this sort of mercantile approach to music and recordings nowadays, because
Yeah.
Glenn Gould's recording of the Goldberg was such a huge success, perhaps the greatest financial success of a classical music album, especially the piece itself, the Goldberg Variations.
Yeah,
So
sure.
whenever a record company is going to put out another Goldberg Variations, it needs to somehow, it's almost like I don't know if they communicate this to the artist, but it needs to have this kind of sort of a pace, a kind of an homage to Glenn Gould. It needs to have this kind of esoteric, almost religious, and like an elegy, to Glenn Gould and to Bach. It becomes too religious for my taste.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Which
And
Glenn
Glenn
Gould was
was,
such a he was a he just really, he tears the piece apart. He makes it his own. He's really he doesn't he plays homage to it by his passion for it, by his love for it, but not because he. But what I love about him is he at least my interpretation is that he sees himself as an equal. Here's the great God Bach, but I'm going to make this is going to be my piece, not Bach piece anymore, and I feel like our contact with this music as artists is so oblique. It's just it's not direct anymore. We're going through a million recordings, and then once we filter all of those recordings, then we have to embody the ghost of Glenn and the ghost of
I have to bring up another pianist who is a pianist who I'm doing my darndest to get her name around. She died very young.
Mhm.
I could have seen her probably if I'd gone to Europe, because she was playing until she got sick. She was the daughter of Anatol Ugorsky, and her name was Dina Yugorskaya, and she only made maybe a dozen recordings. And we don't really have record stores anymore, but you can buy them from places. I
I've
wrote
been
her back.
listening to her because of you. I really love her recordings, and I shared an article that you posted recently on your Substack.
I'm grateful
Uh,
that you did. I think she was
yes,
just a
wonderful.
great
Chopin
genius.
preludes, beautiful
Chopin
also.
preludes are gorgeous.
Yes,
Gorgeous, and her Bach is very beautiful. She did a
very beautiful.
great Brahms.
The
The
B
thing
minor,
about
the 24 is a very beautiful. I think you posted that one.
Yeah,
The B
yeah.
minor, number
Yeah,
24
the
was
last of the
the
first
last
book,
of the first
that
book.
amazing prelude and fugue. But
Yes,
she also recorded the whole Well-Tempered Clavier, and they're all very, very good, and you can find her on YouTube, and you can also buy her records, and I just wanna say that I think if she had lived longer and hadn't been sick for pretty much the last 7 or 8 years of her life, that if she'd had a full life, she'd now be recognized as one of the very, very great pianists. And the one thing I'll say about her is that she was a little like Pollini. Pollini once said that for him to add a piece to his repertory, he had to be absolutely sure that he'd never get tired of the piece. And she was that way too. It's the Beethoven late sonatas, it's Bach, it's beautiful Schubert. Her last recording when she was mortally ill is the Schubert B flat. And it's just gorgeous. So anyway, that's my plug for Dina
no,
Uger.
thank you
I
for
just
bringing her
love
to my attention, because I've been listening to a lot of her. I listen very carefully, and I take a lot of time to look at the things you always recommend, which brings me
okay.
also to your love for popular music, which is
Yeah,
something
yeah.
I love too. I remember one of your Facebook posts that I loved because it clicked with one of my favorite singers was Nick Drake,
Yeah. Yeah.
Riverman. Riverman.
Yeah, that's probably his best song, I
Oh,
think.
he's so
I mean,
and the
there's a lot of
arrangement.
great songs. And you know what amazes me about that is it's a song in 5/4 that doesn't always put it in your face that they're playing in 5/4. And nothing against Dave Brubeck, and it was actually Paul Desmond who wrote the song. But, in a lot of 5/4 music and more complicated meters, you can almost feel the people counting the music the whole time, and you don't feel that with Riverman.
No, no, I think
If you don't know what 5/4 is, it's still a very, very beautiful song all by
it's an
itself.
incredible song. I mean, speaking about tragic lives that, or life that came to an end very, very, very soon. I mean, the fact that he wrote this piece when he was just a teenager, I mean, really it's quite remarkable. And another thing that I love about that piece and that album is his collaboration with the arranger, which I'm not remembering the name, but he went on
I
to do
I
arrangement.
can't come up with it either.
Yes,
Wasn't Buckmaster or any of the ones who
no,
have done.
no, they, he brought him in for this album, and I have to say that it's just, especially for Riverman, is one of the most beautiful arrangements I've heard in popular music and music in general. It's,
You know what I always feel about Riverman? I always feel that if the British composer, who is another one of my favorites, Frederick Delius, if he had written a pop song, he would have loved to have written Riverman, because he's this very melancholy composer, and not all of his stuff is great by any means, but he has this strange, very British melancholy, and there are moods where I put on Delius, and he hits me exactly where I live. So I'm
yes.
very fond of pieces like Sea Drift and the Song of Farewell and a number of other pieces. He wrote a very good cello concerto, I think. I mean, not cello concerto. Yeah, he wrote a cello concerto too.
I haven't heard
But he
this.
also did a cello sonata, which is excellent, which I like, which is never played. Jacqueline Dupre made a recording of the cello sonata, and it's a lovely work. But anyway, that's my second plug for you, because
Yeah.
Delius, somebody who you may or may not like, but for those of us who are fairly melancholy, you know, he's special.
It's the perfect song. It's a perfect song. But you recommend so many different pop artists. Your love for pop music, is it equal as your love for classical music? I mean, where does it stand? You know,
I don't no, I would say it's just different. You know, that
different,
it's a
right?
little bit like asking me if my love for classical music is like my love for Dawn Powell. You know, it's just it's a very different thing. But you know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and you know, this was my popular music, and there are a lot of people in popular music who still mean an enormous amount to me, and I play them fairly regular, probably more classical music these days. But when I was a kid, you know, I was about 13 when I started liking the Beatles, and then I learned to like a lot more people when I became, for a while, a hippie. I mean, I have pictures of me with hair down to here and
Yeah,
all that stuff.
Windows. Great
And I
hair.
was I was part of, you know, that whole time. And so I learned about a lot of artists that are not particularly well known, you know, and but who mean a great deal to me. So there we are.
What do you think is happening today in the pop and even classical music world? Because I'm not very optimistic, and I see things in a very dark place right now. I don't know. Do you feel the same way, or do you think there is hope? And I really I feel sometimes that we came to the end of music and beautiful creation somehow. And I think that the best is behind us in
Well,
classical and pop music. Do you feel the same way, or?
you know, I have to say I don't, because there are still composers living who mean a great deal to me, and some of them are younger than I am. And they're also, you know, it depends on what kind of pop music you mean. Pop is such a huge business now, you know. It's a little like what's happened to movies, you know, and you know, I would say, you know, I can't bear all the Star Wars and comic book movies. That's just me. I have a lot of friends who really love them, and I can tell that they're well made. I'm just not really interested in comic heroes. I was when I was about 11 and 12, but for me, it's not something that I'm interested in. But, you know, we still have good small films that are coming out that are really first class, and they won't make as much money by any means. And unfortunately, if you look at all the stuff we had in the 70s, you know, we would have, you know, the 1970s is one of the greatest generations for films. Um, so I can't be as unhappy as you are, and there still is some rock music that I love a great deal. My big difficulty is I never warmed as much as I should, because I recognize that this music is significant on a whole ton of different levels, but I'm not particularly interested in modern jazz. And, you know, there's some things I like, obviously. There are things that I admire, but it's not a style of music that ever grabbed me and made me want to go out and tell lots of people about it. Because number one, there are lots of really great jazz critics. Number two, I also only write about pop music that I really like and fear that it won't be recognized otherwise. There are three groups that I love a lot who I've written about, who are still there and who I listen to. I'm always interested in what they do. And, like any composer, it's not all going to be great. But I listen to Ockerville River,
Mhm.
which is a group that is headed up by a man named Will Sheff, who writes superb melodies and also writes really smart, dark lyrics. And I admire him enormously. I admire a group called the High Llamas enormously. Um, they were a band, and the guy who really is the guy who is the High Llamas is a fellow named Sean O'Hagan. And anything he does, I will always listen to because he's given me enormous amount of pleasure with his albums with the High Llamas. That's Llamas. There's a little pun there. And then I also greatly admire a fellow living here in New York, a friend of mine named Stephen Merritt, who has about 4 groups. And his best known group is Magnetic Fields. And he did a 3 CD set, which he recorded only in his room, basically. No studio, no nothing. And he got friends in to do it with him. And it's 69 different love songs, and there are love songs of every different possible kind. Some sound like Gilbert and Sullivan, some sound like Johnny Cash, some sound like Virgil Thompson, some sound like, you could go on and you could mention a number of others. And he is very, very prolific. And anything he does, I take seriously. I don't like everything, but a lot of music is not aimed for 71-year-old, men who basically grew up on classical music. But I still listen to him. I don't know what I'd do if I had to give up my old Brian Wilson recordings. I mean, those are gorgeous, and that's a
Yes.
man. I had a good friend who died very young, a fellow named Tim Suster, who was a Stockhausen student. And we got to know each other, and I was asking about Stockhausen. We were just having a great time. And then it turned out that he thought that Brian Wilson was actually a great musical genius. Now, a very troubled musical genius. And a lot of the stuff doesn't work at all, but he was all about strange sounds. And that's what Tim was into. So he had this a little bit like our conversation now. And then we got to, say, early 70s Beach Boy music but he had all sorts of mental problems. And so he did a lot of stuff which I don't want to hear necessarily again. And he was also in a really, really big band where they wanted lots of money. So he was pushed in a way that the 3 bands that I've mentioned to you have not been pushed, but becoming an absolute superstar, and being associated with, of all things, surfing and cars and things like that, they wanted more of this because it was making millions of dollars.
There is a
And
documentary about him now out, right?
well, he died last year. He died
So
last year, but he had not made a really, I mean, the conversation I had with Tim Suster was in 1978 or 79 or 80. And we're just fascinated with his whole career and how he turned records into works of art. And of course, that's what Stockhausen did too. And it's what Tim did. So I think that's the reason, in part. I wish I had a recording of that. I'd love to see what, Tim and Tim said about Brian in the 1970s. But we just found each other like, you hear it too, huh? Because they were sort of considered a teeny bopper band, and they had these huge hits, which were kind of teeny bopper songs. But he was also doing very strange and interesting things with sound. And in my opinion, my main interest in him, I'm interested in him as a composer, but I'm at least as interested in him as a producer and a guy who made very, very strange records.
I have to, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I have to talk about just for a second or two about your new Substack page. You started a new Substack page, which I think is a wonderful idea. I've been following it
Thank,
and
thank,
resharing, some of the things you have posted there. And what I love about it is that and I love the way you started with your first, um, article was an introduction to people that might be interested about music, interested on getting to know more about classical music. And
yeah, yeah,
I love that that was your sort of like overture, you know, to this what is it seems that it will become a kind of a, a, um, a place where you will publish a lot of your articles from criticisms from the past. But the
yeah.
fact that you started with this, I loved it so much because my entire life has been about, making other people love the things I love, and the things I love are classical music. And the way you write that article is just so wonderful. And why
Thank
did you
you.
choose that to be the first one rather than just something?
Well, I wanted to sort of introduce myself and just say what I would be doing because, I'm an obsessive Facebook guy, and I've been doing that for the last 10 years, 15 years, really pretty close now.
You might be one of the few reasons I still have Facebook.
A lot of people tell me that, and I'm very honored by it. There are a lot of people who are there, and a lot of my friends who used to be on Facebook are now coming onto this. I mean, I'll tell you why I started it. After a long time as a full professor in 2 departments, and also before that as a full-time job at the New York Times and then at Newsday and then the Washington Post, I'm now a freelancer. And part of the reason I started this was somebody said you can make a little money that way, And so late in my life, I wish I'd learned that magical thing about how to make money because I didn't. I made a mess of myself in real estate. I just didn't have the gift or I guess the timing is more like it because I lived in places that were, that were not necessarily fashionable areas of fashionable cities. And actually, where I live now on the Upper West Side near Columbia is like that. But fortunately, this is rent stabilized, so I can still live in New York. But I could never, ever come to New York and set up anything if I didn't have this apartment. So I'm very lucky to have that, but I also need to make money. And one of the music schools, one of the very good music schools, led me on with the idea of a position there for about a year, and then just dropped me because I got a little cross. I kept saying, "Look, I got to make some money." And they aren't offering a whole lot of money for books these days. I do write for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post a lot, and I'm starting to write again obituaries for the New York Times, which, and they pay decently, but it's not like having a steady job. And, I would love to teach. And one of the reasons why I'm
Have you
doing my
considered selling life insurances?
Huh? Well, I can't see myself doing it. I can't see myself doing a lot of things that people figure out how to do because all my life I've just done things that I really want to do. And as such, I end up being 71 and, surviving on freelance work. And, and some people can afford to pay for my Substack, and I'm incredibly grateful to those who can. but I understand how some people can't afford to pay for my Substack. So I'm keeping it free. But I'm still trying to find out, find a job, find a teaching job. I can really teach people how to write rather quickly. And I'm not doing this as a commercial for myself, but the Substack is to some extent that, because I want people to know I'm still around. I know a lot. I can talk about a whole lot of different things. We haven't talked about my autism here.
Well, this is
Right.
I wanted to talk about that, but I didn't want to take too much of your time, and I thought like, well,
Yeah,
perhaps we
well,
can have a
we'll do it maybe
conversation
another
about that because your book,
parallel play.
parallel lives, right?
Parallel play.
Parallel play, yes, it's a book about your life with and the diagnosis
Autism.
of Asperger, and I
Yeah.
thought that was
Asperger is no longer a diagnosis. They now just say it's autism, and
autism.
that's
Okay,
fine. And I
yeah.
like that because there was a time, maybe when I wrote my first piece for the New Yorker about it, when they treated autism as something that meant people were lost completely, and they bang their head and they have tantrums, do all that stuff. And that's part of it. And believe me, I've done that stuff. But the other thing is that with me, I'm convinced that the quote unquote good things I've done in my life, the things which the world applauds or used to applaud, come from my autism too. I mean, not many kids go out in their yard at 11 and scream at all their friends and tell them how to be in my own silent movies, you
Right,
know?
right.
And so, it's just a different sort of brain. And I'm fine with it now, and I'll talk about it. But I like the fact that Asperger's is not there, because there was a time when autism people were considered lost by a lot of people, and Asperger kids were treated as these wonderful little geniuses, and it's not a whole lot of fun to have autism all the time,
Well,
because they're
you talk about the toll that having autism has taken in your personal life, in your family life. The fact that
absolutely.
you felt that you were very detached to your kids as they were growing up, and I was wondering because you now have a grandson, and how do you do you do you feel different now in that connection to your grandson than you felt as you described to your kids growing up because of autism?
Well, remember that book is quite old now,
Mhm.
and that was part of it. There were other problems. I mean, I've been married twice, and both of my wives found me fairly difficult. And I mean, I mean, there are things that I don't do, I can't do in the same way that a lot of people can do. But there are other things I can do, and I've found out what they are. And one of them is writing, and another is sharing my enthusiasms with people and telling them exactly why I love this. And, as such, I'd basically say I'm a pretty happy man. There are things that I missed, but there are also a lot of things which I did and continue to do, and I still want to do if somebody wants me to do them. So
Well, I think
so
you should do them,
here I
and
am.
I think you should do them, and if there is any way that I can advocate for that, uh, and we can talk about all of the things that you love again and as many times as you would like, and you're available, that will be my honor. I really
I
love
would
what you
be
do,
I
and
would be very honored by that too. On the other hand, on some levels, I guess I'm a pretty good self promoter, because I wrote to Bill Buckley and said, "Do this,"
and
and
to
I've got
Glenn Gould,
other ideas
Gould.
I want to do. When I talked, I mean, and I'm not going to say anything more about him because he doesn't like to be talked about much. but I had the idea of writing to Thomas Pynchon and asking him if he'd write liner notes for a recording I made of Spike Jones recordings, not the filmmaker Spike
Right,
Jones.
right.
Wonderful, brilliant, crazy comic band leader, Spike Jones. And so Pynchon agreed to do the liner notes for that. And that's all I will say about him. But, I have these ideas and I still got ideas. And I just wish somebody would recognize them and say, hey, why don't you come here and do this? And so we'll see. Maybe this will help. Certainly, I think the Substack will help. The fact that I talk to a lot of people may help. And, I'm very grateful for anything you can do, but I'm also surviving by myself. I'm still here. I've got a rent stabilized apartment. I've got some papers who like to publish me once a month. I wish it was once a week. That would take care of a lot of things. And I should also add that one of the reasons for Facebook and for Substack is I love to teach. I had 12 years at the University of Southern California, and then I had a terrible brain injury, and it took me a long time to get over that brain injury. And so I retired from there, and but there's nothing that says I couldn't teach again.
Well, I think these avenues that you're finding are perhaps a great way of channeling that love for teaching, and I think you should continue doing it. I mean, I would love to dedicate another hour to talk to you about the 25 opera recommendations you made in another article, your recommendations of the classical
Sure.
music composers and albums that you recommended for on your first article,
Yeah.
and I just have to say there was only one thing that I would say about one of the recommendations. You talk about Charles Ives,
Yeah.
and you talk about the Concord Sonata, and I would have to say that I would add to that the first piano sonata, because I'm such a fan of William Masellos, and I
Yeah.
thought that
Oh, wasn't he
William
wonderful?
did such an incredible, recorded such an incredible version of that sonata. And to me, I know that the Concord Sonata of Charles Ives is like the most famous one, and people only talk about that one because of many reasons. But for some reason, this is for me personally, I find the first piano sonata to be a better work.
Good for you, and
Yeah.
keep publicizing it, keep talking about it, keep
Yeah.
playing it. I mean, the fact that Ives is one of the composers who I personally don't respond to as
Mhm.
much as I respond to a lot of others is I mean, it might be interesting for somebody who's interested in me or this, but I have enormous respect for Ives. He's just, one of those few composers who I don't feel the same strong love for him that most other people do. But I have heard people, I think of him, and I'm saying this to a pianist, and I hope you won't be unhappy with me. I don't like most Liszt. Um, how, and I really don't like most Liszt. However, you get the right pianist doing the later works, or even some of the exciting, fun Hungarian rhapsodies, or the sonata in B minor, and I can be persuaded. And I
Yes.
have been persuaded by some pianists who've done that. And I've been persuaded very much by some pianists who have done the Ives Concord. And I should listen to the Masellos again.
Oh, dude,
I came to know the Kirkpatrick. I had the old.
that's wonderful too. That's wonderful
Yeah,
too.
it is,
The Marcellos is a great album. If you can find the original one, I have the LP because I collect LPs, and it's a Columbia record with the Davis Bundler Tanzes on one side
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the first piano
I
sonata
remember
on
that.
the other side, and that is one of my favorite albums ever.
Well, I have a whole set of, I think, all the albums Marcellus made for RCA and Columbia.
And he did a lot of contemporary music. He did a
did. Oh,
lot
yeah,
when
very
nobody was recording contemporary music.
Yeah, yeah, and he did those, those great, those great Copeland works. I
Yeah.
love Copeland's piano music. I love
I have some of his
that.
LPs that were never transferred to CD, and they are
They
still
have been
LPs.
now. They have been now.
All of them, you think?
I
Okay.
believe so. But the thing about what they're doing with record companies these days is they bring out these things and then they sell only 2 or 3,000, so they don't reprint them. So there's also a really nice set of all the work that Columbia did of Ives. But if you want the Davidsbundertanza, you're going to have to look for the Marcello's set, which is, I think, about 9 CDs or something.
Mhm.
And I
Right.
fear it may be pretty expensive now. I got it when it came out because I thought, oh, wow, this is great. And I have a wonderful, much younger friend who studied with Marcellos and adored him. And
Yes. He
I
was,
don't
his Schumann was really, I
know. He
think
was.
to me, to this day, still perhaps my favorite recording of that piece, and of
I wish he'd
both of
done the
them.
fantasy.
Excuse me?
I wish he'd done the fantasy because I don't think he did.
Yes, yes.
That is, I love a lot of Schumann, but that's my very favorite piece by Schumann.
Yes, Horacio Gutierrez, Cuban pianist, and was also my teacher.
Gosh,
He recorded the fantasy recently. Well, not recently, like maybe 5, 6 years ago, with Adam Apeshouse, who, as you know, passed away
yeah.
recently. But he did a recording of the fantasy with the Chopin preludes,
He
and
will. He and I. Oh, I'd love to hear that. I will find that.
I'll send it to you. And
Oh,
yeah,
I'd
it's a
love that.
wonderful recording. I was somehow involved in the production of that album with him and Adam, and that came out really well. It was nominated for a Grammy. The reason I mention him is because Horacio studied a lot with William Marcellos, and they
Oh,
were very
yeah.
very close friends. And I think he played the fantasy for him.
Gutierrez was also very close friends with an actress friend of mine. I think we probably saw her more than anybody else in the 90s, Polly Holiday, who
Yes,
was a wonderful person.
I
Brill
met Polly through him,
Oh,
and
she was so wonderful.
some of my
She
concerts.
was in very bad shape the last 7 years, and I was not in touch with her really.
Flo.
But, in the 80s and, no, I guess we met in the 90s, and until about 7 years ago, anytime I came to New York, I'd see her, and she adored Gutierrez, adored him. He was a wonderful pianist. She'd even play for him. She'd play for me too, and she was a very good, solid, Sunday pianist.
We went out for dinner with him and with her a few times, and I got to know her.
She was
To know her
adorable.
well, and she was the name of her famous TV character was Flo, right?
She would never say the tagline, which everybody would come up to her and say, "Oh, would you say 'Kiss my grits' for me?"
It's my
And
grits.
she, "Oh, no, you say it much better than I do." I saw her do that a couple of times.
Yeah, I was sorry to hear that she passed. I think I heard it
She was a
from
darling.
you.
I missed her terribly.
Yeah, she was wonderful. But Tim, I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I hope that we can do it again whenever
I'm
you have
grateful too. I'm grateful
when you have
too.
time. I have so many more things to talk to you about, but we can leave it for next time.
I owe my son a call, and I have a friend visiting here, so I should probably let
Yes,
it go
I'll let you
now.
go.
But we will do it again, and I very much enjoyed it. I thought your questions were excellent, And I'm grateful that my work means a lot to you. You
It
know,
means a lot. And
it's meant a lot to me. I'll tell you that. It's
Well-
still, it's, I mean, I'm very, very proud of my children and of my friends, but, for me, it's always, to a large extent, been work and new, interesting things that I can share with people.
Let me ask Tim a question. Tim, what do you think about the films you've seen by the other kids?
Well,
Are they good?
as a whole,
Yeah. Have you seen some that you really think are good?
yes.
What about most of them? Are they good or bad?
Most of them are, there are a lot of them are alike. I think most of them are sort of right in the middle. But there are some marvelous ones I've seen, and there are also some very poor ones. There's one by a 3-year-old girl.
And that is a poor one or a marvelous
No,
one?
well,
It's hard to
I
judge
don't
a
know.
3-year-old's
It's very-
picture.
for a
Listen,
3-year-old, it's the greatest film ever
the
made.
best 3-year-old movie. One more quick question. Do you read a lot? Books?
Yes, I do.
Novels?
Yes, I do.
Do you
I
like
read-
that?
I prefer seeing films, but I do enjoy reading a great deal. I think it's
Just curious.
just wonderful.
As one pseudo-intellectual to another. Thank you very much, Tim Page.